All right, guys, back at it again. Now we're going to be talking about the First Amendment, and there is a lot to unpack here. So we're going to start with religious freedom. There are really two clauses here that break up this civil liberty. That's the Establishment Clause and Free Exercise Clause. Simply put, with the Establishment Clause, the government cannot support any one religion. Thomas Jefferson called this the wall of separation between church and state. As far as free exercise goes, Congress cannot interfere with the practice of one's religion. However, as the courts have shown, this is not an unlimited right, and there are definitely checks to this civil liberty. So let's take a look at that with certain court cases. With the Establishment Clause, the really important case here is Engel v. Vitale. With this one, this is the ban on school prayer. So you had a public school that was requiring students to recite a prayer at the start of each school day. And the question became, is school-sponsored prayer a violation of the Establishment Clause? And ultimately, the decision was yes. Yes, it is. This is no way a black and white issue. It's very complex. There's a lot of different ways to try to get around this decision. So with Lemon versus Kurtzman, they just developed the Lemon test. And what the Lemon test does for us is it helps us to determine if a law violates the Establishment Clause or not. And they have a three-pronged test. And of those, you can read right there. It says you must have a secular purpose, meaning that it must not be a religious purpose. It must not advance or inhibit any one religion. And government and religion aren't excessively entangled in the process. Something that I think will probably be making it to the courts here soon is this new Bible literacy class that's kind of taken through a lot of conservative states. As you see the tweet up here, President Trump mentioned numerous states are introducing Bible literacy classes, giving students the option of studying the Bible. Starting to make a turn back, ? Great exclamation point. So here's the thing. They're saying that these new classes in public schools are electives. So students are choosing to take them. And that these Bible classes are not to advance religion, but to simply study the Bible. So in their words, it's going to be secular. It's not going to be religious in nature, that it's not going to attempt to advance Christianity. So we'll see how they have those standards written up, if that will suffice or not, but undoubtedly it will be put to the Lemon test, and we will see where that goes. All right, free exercise. So the big case here is Wisconsin versus Yoder. What we had was a Wisconsin law that required children to attend school up until the age of at least 16, but Amish parents felt that this was a violation of their religious practices, that the value system that is put on students at this age was in direct violation of their way of life and their faith. So the issue, did Wisconsin's mandate violate the free exercise of Amish parents who wished to withdraw their children after 8th grade? And ultimately, the courts did rule in favor of the Amish here. The values of secondary school violate the fundamental way of life of the Amish, and therefore mandated attendance would violate the right of free exercise of their religion. The real key part here is that there was not a compelling state interest to prevent the Amish from not sending their kids for 2 more years of school. That it's not going to make that much of a difference. And it would make to the state, where it would make a lot more difference to these families. And that's really what we come down to when we're determining when free exercise can be limited, if there is a compelling state interest. So when the state's interest is actually greater than the individual's interest, it can be limited. Some cases that we can point to here are Oregon v. Smith, in which there was ritual drug use with peyote, and the state punished those individuals. Well, in this case, the courts decided that there was a greater state interest than an individual interest by not allowing drug use. In Reynolds v. United States, polygamy was put to this test, and again, the the courts determined that there was a greater state interest in preventing polygamy than there was a greater individual interest in being allowed to marry more than one person. Onwards to free speech. The big topic here, the big controversy is whether or not national security outweighs political expression. I mean, when can speech be limited for national security purposes? And the major case here that we should look at is Schenck versus the United States from 1919. What happened was Schenck was protesting World War I by trying to convince people not to avoid the draft, essentially. And this was the violation of the Espionage Act at the time. So he was convicted, and the question became, was this a violation of his First Amendment rights to free speech? The courts came up with a decision here that has set a very interesting precedent, and that is that free speech can, in fact, be limited, that he was guilty and that it was not unconstitutional to do this because it created a clear and present danger. They compared this to yelling fire in a crowded building. Now, that has since been kind of reined in, and they come up with a test to determine if something is clear and present danger. Essentially, the speech must incite imminent illegal action, and it must be likely to incite or produce such action. So if you say you're going to shoot somebody, but you don't have a gun, you may not be in violation here. But if you have a gun and say, I am going to shoot you, then we have an issue. All right, so speech can be limited, especially if it creates a clear and present danger. All right. First Amendment, free press. Again, national security versus our freedoms here. The big word to know is prior restraint. And this is when the government decides to censor the press before it even comes out, before it can be published. And prior restraint was put to the test with New York Times versus the United States in 1971. What was going on here was that President Nixon attempted to prevent the New York Times from publishing a series of articles that were releasing Pentagon Papers. Now, I'm not sure how much you remember from U.S. history, but essentially these were a bunch of papers showing what was really going on with Vietnam for the last couple decades. And the president was trying to prevent this from getting out because it didn't paint a very good picture. The question was, is prior restraint a violation of the First Amendment's freedom of press clauses? And the courts determined that there was no clear and present danger here, that prior restraint has to pass this test as well, and it did not in this case. So the New York Times actually won that prior restraint is not allowed unless there is a clear and present danger. On to symbolic speech, and this is a fun one. What is symbolic speech? Well, it's speech that comes in the form of images, signs, and other symbols. What you wear, for instance. In Tinker vs. Des Moines in 1969, students were suspended for wearing black armbands in a silent protest of the Vietnam War, and the school suspended them. The question, was this speech violated? Were their First Amendment rights violated by the school? Is symbolic speech itself protected? The courts decided that symbolic speech in schools is protected as long as it does not disrupt the school's academic mission. And in this case, it did not. It was a silent protest. It was not disruptive in nature. It did not interfere with their academic mission. And ultimately, those are the two things we have to look at to say, when can schools punish or restrict free speech? Right? You have to prove that it's violating the school's academic mission. For instance, bong hits for Jesus is a violation of the school's attempt to, not promote drug use. And so those students were effectively suspended. Sorry about that. And when it is, in fact, disruptive. If it's disruptive, it can be limited. All right, guys.